info. Yeah, but that's it. So let's begin. And then if you guys have any questions about that, I can stick around because this is the last time I see you guys. Except it's not really seeing you. I haven't seen you at all this whole semester. I've only seen my wall. But you know, maybe we'll meet one day in person. Just come visit when everything returns to normal, which I hope it does at some point. But okay. Let's get on with it. Let this person into the class. I did. It's a cool headset. In office hours, Itzel has headphones with ears. They're awesome. I wanted them, but I won't know you. So introduce yourself. Say, hey, I'm Christine. I took your class when the world was falling apart during COVID. What? Yeah, so anyways, without further ado, let us begin the end. Begin the end. So this is our last phylum that we're going to talk about, and it's when vertebrate life comes into play. Phylum Chordata. Because this whole time, as we've been talking about the animal kingdom, we've been talking about invertebrate life. And we'll define what I mean by a vertebrae or vertebral column as well shortly. But first I want to define what organisms fall under the category of chordates. What's a chordate under Phylum Chordata? And there's 4 main traits among all chordates. Get my notes up here. And they're listed here on the slide. And I'll just write them again on the board. So the 4 shared traits of Phylum Chordata is a nerve cord, so nervous tissue, and this becomes, or this is part of the central nervous system and the brain. Gotta fix my battery settings here. I think it's time for me to update my Apple products because this thing dies now at the end of each day, even though I charge it overnight. Probably because I updated it. Gosh. All right. So nerve cord, this is part of our central nervous system, phylum and chordates, which leads to the brain, which is this high concentration of nervous tissue, neurons, brain cells, or neurons are the technical term for brain cells of the nervous system. There's other cell types as well in the nervous system, but yeah, like astrocytes and glial cells and stuff with different roles. But anyways, the second trait of chordates is a notochord. So what's a notochord? A notochord is sort of they're connective tissue. It's connective tissue, and in humans, it's specifically gelatinous discs. Not sure about other animals, but all chordates have a notochord of some kind, and these discs are in between vertebrae. So the purpose of a notochord vertebrae. So they actually, it's kind of like a like shocks on your bike or car. it kind of serves a protective role, and from vertebrae grinding together. And if you jump up and down, it's not going to affect the nerve cord, or the vertebrae aren't going to become damaged. So that's what a notochord is for. And all chordates have some kind of notochord. And then third trait amongst chordates is a muscular postanal tail. Of course, we do not have a tail, but we learned, right, that in the embryo stage, we do. And then it degrades, it apoptoses, and it goes away. We evolve to not have a tail. But in the embryo, we certainly do, as we are chordates as humans. And then most other chordates have a tail. And last thing are pharyngeal slits. And these slits become the gills in aquatic animals. So become gills, or part of the ear and throat in terrestrial animals, or part of ear. I'll just write, or part of ear / throat. Because of course we don't have gills, right? Oh, someone's in the... So these are our defining characteristics of all organisms under the category of Phylum Chordata. Notice that having vertebrae, or being a vertebrate, isn't one of them. So essentially, there are invertebrate chordates. And they have these characteristics. They probably have some sort of primitive notochord. You don't really have to know this, but I do just want you to know that that there are invertebrate chordates. There are invertebrate chordates. However, all vertebrates on Earth with vertebrae that protect the nerve cord are in the Phylum Chordata. So if you're talking about a vertebrate animal, fish, it's a chordate. All vertebrates are chordates. But as we learned last time, not all invertebrates are chordates. But there are some that are invertebrate chordates. So let's take a look at a few examples. There's actually just kind of one or two. Oh, before we do that, I was editing these slides pretty last minute. To cut some things out and add some things, but actually we'll come back to this slide in a moment. Okay, squirrel. Here's our invertebrate chordates. So there's a few, and so these guys are called sea squirts. So let me erase the board. So they have these characteristics, the invertebrate chordates, but they don't have vertebrae. So these on the right are called sea squirts. So invertebrate chordates include yes, they are called sea squirts. I don't know why. That is the technical name for them. Sea squirts. And then the other organism on the slide that I'll show you again in a moment is called a lancelet. So lancelets. another example of an invertebrate chordate. And you'll see that they both have the 4 characteristics I mentioned: the tail, the nerve cord, notochord. So this is the lancelet on the left. Pharyngeal slits, tail, yeah. But I do like to mention that because I think sometimes people think all chordates are vertebrate animals, but not necessarily true. I think marine biologists would be upset if I didn't mention these 2 guys. So let's take I included a fun slide before this, before we get to vertebrates, or rather, before we talk about how vertebrates came into existence. I just wanted to throw in a couple examples of chordates, vertebrate chordates, and that's going to be our amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So most of, besides like mushrooms, fungi, plants, most of life as you might know it before this class consists of vertebrate chordates. These are things we encounter all the time. And even fish. I didn't really include fish, but fish fall under chordates as well. And they, if you go fishing or you eat fish. So this is really the phylum that you are most familiar with, right? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about how vertebrates, well, first we'll talk about vertebrates and some of the very first vertebrates. But really, to wrap up this lecture, I want to talk about this amazing thing, which was the sea to land transition. So like I mentioned, and like we kind of have seen, I'm going in chronological order. We started with sponges, the very first animal, multicellular, heterotrophic animal. Then we talked about cnidarians, and then we went to the 3 phyla of worms, and then we talked about mollusks and arthropods. We didn't get to land until we talked about arthropods. So that was a separate event. There were actually primitive arthropods. Scientists, I think they're still trying to figure out if it was a horseshoe crab or some kind of centipede that had a very basic set of lungs and were able to breathe the air. And so that transition, gave rise over millions of years to all the insects, right? And that's a sea to land transition. But before that, everything I mentioned just now, we've been in the ocean the whole time. And really, we still have. So the first vertebrate chordates were fish. Our ancient ancestors were first fish, right? Bony fish and even sharks. Sharks are probably one of the most ancient. They have a vertebrae composed of cartilage, and so they're pretty old evolutionarily. And so really there were 2 sea to land transitions. Okay, sorry, got a message. There were 2 sea to land transitions. And the first was that transition with a horseshoe crab or this millipede that had this primitive set of lungs called book lungs and gills, and they could breathe air and get oxygen from the air as well as water. And then that's an arthropod, right? And all the arthropods exploded from there over millions of years, gave rise and evolved to become insects, spiders, crabs and lobsters, etc. They could breathe the air. But we're very different from them. We didn't come from them. We have a common ancestor, of course, all life does. But the most recent common ancestor we have that came from the oceans and transitioned to land was something called a lungfish, very appropriately named. A vertebrate fish that developed a set of lungs and could breathe air outside of the water. This was a separate event. The transition from sea to land with the insects, that was another thing, and became insects, and we see them all the time, flies, beetles, etc. But this other transition gave rise to all the rest of the chordates I just mentioned. So this lungfish and these ancient fish that were able to breathe air eventually evolved throughout, descent with modification to become really everything we see on land, besides insects and arthropods, right? But, the mammals, elephants, reptiles, amphibians. And so we're going to talk first about what defines vertebrate, and then I want to talk about that transition because I think it's really fascinating. So let's take a look at vertebrate life. So the evolution of vertebrates, and when the first vertebrates came into being. And it was about 470 million years ago. And again, some of the most ancient vertebrates are, again, in Phylum Chordata and lampreys. If you've heard of a lamprey, those are really ancient fish, still around today. And again, sharks as well are pretty ancient. So vertebrates evolved. Let's first write the date here. Vertebrates, like us, evolved approximately 470 million years ago. We're still in the sea at this point, right? We're still fish, sharks, right? And let's define vertebrae. So what does it mean to be a vertebrate? So vertebrae. So vertebrae are bones made of calcium or cartilage, in the case of sharks, that function in protecting spinal cord and the notochord. Spinal cord, nerve cord, same thing. And the notochord. I'm just checking my notes here. So it was the lamprey and then sharks and manta rays. Very, very long time ago. So they diverged out from a common ancestor. And then bony ray-finned fish came into being. So fish, again, ancient. Notochord and cartilage are different. In the case of sharks, they are. So the notochord it's a different type of connective tissue, and the actual vertebral column is made of cartilage in sharks. So they have a notochord. I'm not a shark expert. I might have to look into this. It's a great question. But they definitely have vertebrae that serve the protecting role made of cartilage, and as well as a notochord that's either made of a different type of connective tissue, or in addition to that, maybe it's also made of cartilage, but of course you don't have to know this, just that, yeah. But that's a great question. I should ask a shark expert. Or I'll figure it out, or I'll Google it. Yeah, good question. What was I gonna say? Oh. So okay. So in this evolutionary history here, vertebrate chordates emerged. The most ancient of which are sharks and lamprey, manta rays. Let me see. Come on. And then, of course, after them, the ray-finned fish. So, most fin or fish, ray-finned fish, and then lobe-finned fish. And maybe you've had fish and you had a piece of the bone, or you were cooking with it. They have the calcium vertebrae, right? Unlike the sharks. Okay. So after these fish come about, this lungfish emerges, and there's this event of sea to land. So let's talk about that. It's pretty fascinating. I have a video too. I think we'll have time for the video. Yeah. Oh, I have it there too. Okay. The lungfish tetrapods. Okay. So fast forward 100 million years or so. Get my notes here. And so what happened approximately 365 million years ago, 375 to 365 million years ago, these ancient fish, bony ray-finned fish, or actually I think they were the lobe-finned fish that did this, they developed a set of lungs. And they are called the lungfish. They developed a set of lungs, and then over millions of years, they started to develop limbs, because of course that was selected for, because they are faster, they can find food, they could avoid predators. And you can see that transition here. And amazingly, this marks the very first amphibian. So maybe you know about amphibians, frogs, salamanders, geckos. Anyways, toads. Amphibians are among the first vertebrate life forms on land. They represent this transition. You can actually see it in their embryonic stage, this transition. They start as tadpoles, right? And then they develop the limbs. And they become what we call tetrapods, which means four limbs, right? So tetrapods represent the transition from fish to amphibian. And this was 365 million years ago. And the very first, or among the very first fish, again, to come to land and be able to survive was this lungfish. You need lungs to be on land, right? And then from the lungfish, amphibians eventually, as we see there on the slide, limbs eventually were selected for. It took a couple million, 10 million years or so, but hey, evolution's a slow process. And I have this really cool video. It talks about a bashir, which is similar to the lungfish. It's very, very similar to the lungfish. Oh, I think it'll work now. Okay.
This is a fish called a bashir. Bashirs are found in Africa, and like all fish, they live in water. That is, until they met researcher Emily Standen, who was working at McGill University in Canada. Standen thought that she would try raising bashir on land. Why, you ask? To see if it helps them walk. It isn't quite as mad as it sounds. Let's go back a step. Bashirs, unusually among fish, actually have lungs as well as gills, so they can breathe air. But having lungs doesn't mean you can walk, as demonstrated by this lungfish's failed attempts at perambulation. But there are fish that do take tentative steps onto land. Arguably, the masters of fishy walking are these, mudskippers. Bashirs too can make flappy berets over land, but they walk in a very different way. In fact, scientists think they walk like the ancestors of all tetrapods might have walked, fishopods if you will. Studying how they react to a terrestrial environment could help us understand how the very first fishy footsteps were taken on land. Standen's bashirs grew up in a decidedly damp but totally terrestrial environment. She and her team set up some high-speed cameras, placed the bashirs on a stage and let them go. They compared their walking abilities with those of bashirs raised more traditionally, in water. And they saw some differences, subtle but distinct. The landlubbers lifted their heads higher, planted their fins more efficiently, and slipped less often than their aquatic associates. This suggests that bashirs have the ability to modify their behavior in response to their environment, a concept called plasticity. This is the first time that plasticity has been shown to be a potential facilitator of such a major evolutionary step as our ancestors crawling out of the seas and onto land. But it doesn't stop there. When Standen examined the skeletons of her land-living bashirs, she found that their muscles and bones had changed as they adapted to walking. It appears that the bashir's anatomy is as plastic as their behavior. These changes look strikingly similar to the kinds of changes scientists see in the fossil record as ancient species started making the transition to land. It might not look elegant, but don't be deceived. After all, one small flappy step of our fishy ancestors may have led to the giant leaps of mankind.
Isn't that Love that video. So this researcher is simulating this transition. And this Bashir is like the lungfish and has that ability to walk and move about on land, and it has lungs. Like, you know, I didn't, you know, before I, you know, started teaching this and learning about, I don't know, this unit and preparing and stuff, I didn't know that fish ever had lungs. I thought it was pretty amazing. And just kind of this story of how vertebrate chordates came into being and came to land. And of course, from there came the amphibians. Amphibian comes from the Greek root for both ways of life. Amphibians, they start in the water as tadpoles, as you may or may not know, and then they move to land as frogs, right? And amphibians are all like this. They live in both water and land, and they lay eggs in water as well. So it's, you know, both ways of life. That was next in the evolutionary trajectory. And from amphibians came reptiles, like on the slide. From reptiles, the prior slide, reptiles, mammals. That's it. Here we are. So it's pretty cool. I think that's all I want to talk about for this animal lecture, and before we move on to ecology. So are there any questions? It's perfect. We had 40 minutes to talk about ecology. All right, game time. Characteristics of amphibians. Oh, lay eggs in water. I mean, you don't have to know it. I'm not gonna ask you that. So Joey, you're I love Joey because you downloaded my study questions from before. I actually updated them like an hour ago, and I left off, yeah, because every semester is sort of different with timing, especially the last unit. And, you know, I decided to make some lectures longer than others. So we ran out of time to talk about each, okay, yeah, to talk about each class, like reptilia, amphibia, mammalia, right? And what defines them. So we could talk a little, we could have done that today, but I decided to include ecology because ecology, you know, I always have some students that are interested in, you know, ecology, which is a perfect segue to define ecology, actually. So let's see that. So what is ecology? Yeah, they are. I agree. I really like my study questions. Yeah, I try to promote those at the very beginning of the semester and kind of always try to mention them as a good study tool. So let's take a look at ecology now. Oh, hold on a second. Okay, watch ears. Ecology. Anyone know where this is? One of my favorite places on Earth. Been there like 20 times. Yosemite. It does look like Colorado though, won't lie. Yeah, it's Yosemite. That's El Capitan, which that free climber, Alex Honnold, he climbed it without ropes. Craziness. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so what is ecology? Let's define it. So ecology is the study of how organisms interact with each other and their environment, or the environment. So we're going to start our ecology lecture with a few types of what we call community relationships and different relationships among organisms and how they interact with one another. Okay. Oh, I don't know why that came up next, but okay. So the first type is called mutualism. And a relationship of mutualism is demonstrated by this bee and this flower. So when there's mutualism, this is the first community interaction type. So in a mutualistic relationship, both species benefit in some way. They both get something positive out of it. So I can even do like a plus plus. And so what's going on with the bee and the flower, it's actually a pollinator. And so bees inadvertently, unintentionally, are going to get covered in pollen on the tips of the flower. And as it's doing that, it's getting nectar from the flower. It's getting nutrients, food. So the bee is happy. And the flower is also happy because when the bee goes and gets nectar from another flower, he's going to accidentally drop some of the pollen into that flower's, I think the part's called a stigma or whatever, where the female part is of another flower. So the sperm and egg meet. And so he's pollinating, he's other flowers and spreading the genes of the original flower. Remember, pollen grains contain sperm cells. So both organisms are going to benefit from this type of interaction. Another cool example actually would be the, as Itzel knows, she did her project on it, her journal assignment, the gut microbiome. So we have about 10 trillion bacterial cells in our large intestine. They help us do a variety of things. They help facilitate absorption of nutrients, synthesize vitamins for us. They help us even fight infection, a lot of cool stuff. They literally keep us alive. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so obviously that's mutualism. And they get a food source. They get food from what we eat, and they get protection from in a home. So that's a cool second example there of mutualism. So depicted by the other picture on my slide, clownfish, sea anemone. Are you thinking Finding Nemo? Because that's what I thought of when I saw that. And so this relationship is called commensalism. And in commensalism, one species benefits and the other is unaffected. Other is unaffected. So neither positive nor negative effect on the other one. They just don't care. There are a lot of examples of commensalism, but in that example, the clownfish gets protection and a home, so he's benefiting. Protection, remember the sea anemones are cnidarians, and they have stinging cells, so it protects the clownfish, right? Like us, though, they can't get, oh, it's hard to read. Let me move it up a little bit. So this says one species benefits and the other is unaffected. The sea anemone doesn't care. It's unaffected. The clownfish can chill within the sea anemone. It doesn't matter. Won't affect it directly in any way. Another example of this, bird nests in trees. Bird nests, protection, a home. The tree doesn't really care, at least I don't think. What was another one? There's so many examples. There's, cattle egrets on large plains sometimes have birds that chill on their horns and stuff and hang out with them. And the egret, these are like big buffalo type, bighorn sheep type animals. They don't care that the bird's chilling on their horns, really. It's not gonna affect it. But as they move through the plains, it can kick up insects. And so the birds can eat insects and get more food. So that's commensalism. And you can, this is like a plus/null, no effect, positive/no effect. Okay. So a couple more community interactions I want to talk about. Notably predation and defense strategies against predation, predators and prey. Oh, do I have that first? Never mind. My notes are, gotta update these ecology notes. Write that down. But first, let's talk about parasitism, because that's the next slide. Then we'll talk about predator-prey relationship. So let's see that. Parasitism. This is going to be when one species benefits, but the other is harmed. Parasitism, one species benefits while the other is harmed. So this is a positive negative relationship. Lots of parasites in our world. The one I put on the slide here is the parasite that causes malaria, transmitted by mosquitoes. seen on the right there. So the malaria parasite is these two cells here. They're parasitic protozoans, actually. So we've talked about protists. And they get nutrients and they're able to replicate and divide and reproduce in our body. And of course, that gives us malaria and causes disease, and it's not good for us. Yeah, mosquitoes. Yeah, they're annoying. They're annoying, especially because they're a vector for this deadly pathogen. Do they serve any purpose? We should Google that. Maybe. No, they're annoying. They make us itch. But something I've sort of come to appreciate as a biology professor is everything on this planet serves a role in some way that might not positively affect us, but it would positively affect other animals, other creatures, other communities, who knows? So I'm a big fan of all life as a biology professor. Mosquitoes, if they went extinct, wouldn't have a detrimental effect? No way. Huh. Well, if anything, COVID's kind of taught me, it's not to trust every scientist you hear, or just kind of go with what they're saying. I'd have to look into it more is what I'm saying. He says mosquitoes would mostly, oh, see, it saw the opposite. See, it's always important. Okay, anyways. Great discussion. Let's see. Where are we at? So let's talk about predation slash really defense strategies, I think, are fascinating in these community relationships. So defense strategies against predators. Go to my next slide here. So actually, what should I write? I'll just write some examples. But let's look at the pictures first. So if you see on the right here, or I'm sorry, on the left, thorns on plants. This is a mechanical defense against herbivores that want to eat the plants. So that obviously is a good defense mechanism. This plant's called a foxglove plant. It secretes actually poison that is toxic to animals. And so that's another, it's a chemical defense, right? So we have a mechanical defense, chemical defense. And then this is called mimicry. And there's a lot of examples of this. It's very fascinating of mimicry where, so this is a wasp, right? Can sting, has venom, right? And so predators tend to want to avoid the wasp, right? Well, this in the picture here for B, this is a hoverfly. And hoverflies are harmless. They can't sting you. But it evolved to have the same pattern as the wasp, the same coloration, to scare predators away that evolved to avoid poisonous wasps. So it's pretty amazing. It was selected for. They survived more, right? Because these predators would recognize that pattern and not screw with it. Okay. So for the board, let's just write just a couple examples. Thorns, poisons, mimicry, things like that. Man, 20 minutes, okay. Time flies when we have incredible biology lectures and discussion. Okay, any questions? Before we move on, we're going to talk about biodiversity and some cool, fun tidbits and facts about biodiversity on the planet. Okay. Biodiversity. Okay, I knew I had it on my slide. Cool. So biodiversity is defined as the number of different species living on Earth. Approximately 8 million today. That's a lot. Do I have this on my slide too? Oh, I do. Okay, cool. So why is this important? Why is it important to have so many different types of organisms on our planet? We're gonna discuss that. Double check. Okay. The world economy, let's start there. So biodiversity affects, oh, it relates to the lab video, yay. Impacts several areas. The world economy, first and foremost. So uh, 40% of the world's economy depends on natural resources. So jobs, industry, tourism, national parks. The next, food supply, human health and medical discoveries. So let's talk about food supply first. Give me a minute to write that down. So the food supply, why? Crop diversity. So this will be a callback to a previous lecture. We've discussed this. But crop diversity provides agricultural sustainability. Why is this? Sustainability. You'll see on my slide that in the top right, I have a picture of Ireland and a basket of potatoes. The potato famine, this was 1845, and one parasitic fungal infection was able to wipe out all these potato crops because they were all one species and they were susceptible to dying from this disease. But when there's diversity, we've talked about this theme in evolution and meiosis even, and why genetic diversity is a favorable thing in nature, but it improves the odds that there are more organisms resistant to disease. So this is obviously good for the food supply. And then the last thing I listened there was human health and medical discoveries. And so there's a couple neat examples of this. Aspirin, for one, comes from willow trees, the bark of willow trees. Actually, that's right. Aspirin comes from willow trees. So that's cool. Antibiotics come from molds. So different antibiotics from different molds. And then perhaps more important than antibiotics, we get coffee, chocolate, beer. These all come from organisms, life. So yeah, we got to preserve it. Thankfully, there's a plant that can give us chocolate. There's yeast species that can produce beer and wine. That's not going to, give us an infection of any kind, but they're, harmless. Bacteria that produce Greek yogurt, et cetera, et cetera. But really, medical discoveries are the really cool thing. Okay. So I think next I want to talk about the threats to these, or to, well, go to the slide, to these benefits from biodiversity. What can impact biodiversity and decrease the number of different species living on Earth? What are the kinds of things that can negatively affect this concept here? Oh, why do I have this here? So ignore these. The sea otters, if we have time at the end, we'll talk about them. But I kind of like to play this cool video at the end of this lecture. And I want time for that. This is our last lecture. I think it's a neat video. So we'll talk about the cute sea otters if we have time. But I do want to address the threats to this biodiversity. The first of which is pollution. as seen here. Sad. So pollution, both natural and unnatural pollutants. Natural and unnatural. So what do I mean by natural? That has to do with the sea otters I was going to talk about. I'll briefly mention that there's actually a certain type of bacteria called Microcystis bacteria. And they produce a toxin that causes liver poisoning. So let's write cause liver poisoning. Now, how are we contributing to the accumulation of this bacteria? So in the runoff in our sewage from development of homes and malls and even agriculture, the runoff is rich in nutrients, and these bacteria can thrive off these nutrients. And when we develop too close to the oceans, which we do because we want to live on the oceans, right? And on the beach because it's preferable, it's beautiful, and you know what I mean. But the Microcystis bacteria can thrive, and they produce this toxin that can damage the livers in sea otters and other life in our oceans. And so when we destroy the kind of habitats like wetlands that are near the oceans, like lagoons and stuff, and we build on them, these lagoons, they kind of act as a natural barrier to the oceans. So when we disrupt it, the sewage can go straight into the oceans, sadly. So that's what I meant by natural pollutant. Unnatural would be things like trash and oil spills. These are obviously harmful to organisms as well. Another harm, another threat, as I mentioned, habitat destruction. So habitat destruction this would be due to things like deforestation and development. So you can see there, due to deforestation and development. Third threat, do I have it on here? Oops. No, I don't. Okay, that's fine. Invasive species. I'm gonna erase this here. Invasive species. So invasive species are organisms that are artificially introduced into a new area, into a new ecosystem by us on accident, typically, usually not on purpose. So invasive species So these are species that are artificially introduced into a new area by humans, and they have a negative impact on the native ecosystem. And have a negative or harmful impact. And there are so many examples of this. The one I have on the slide is the Asian carp in the Mississippi, Missouri, Illinois rivers. Have a negative impact on the negative ecosystem. And by negative impact, the carp overrun. Oftentimes, these species are so successful and overrun the native populations. They outcompete them for food and shelter, and so the native species start to die because they can't keep up. Rats came to New Zealand in the 1800s and killed most of the birds. Whoa, I didn't know that. Oh, wow. I'm just reading the chat. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's very important, you don't want to disturb the ecosystem. But now that I think about it, the video I want to show you, what time is it? Oh man, 6:45. Maybe is it already? Huh. Never. Really quick. Let's be really quick here. Overexploitation. That's our fourth threat. So overuse of a species for a human purpose. Poaching for ivory, for furs, things like that. This is overuse. Whale hunting for blubber of a species for human purpose. And then the last threat, of course, is climate change. Which the whale. Climate change kills algae, which corals rely on. It results in this coral bleaching effect. Get to that in a moment. Okay. And so climate change is when excess carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels accumulates in the atmosphere. And this leads to rising temperatures globally. Accumulates in atmosphere, leading to rising temperatures. And the rising temperatures have a ton of effects. They melt the glaciers, which is going to have sea levels rise, but these glaciers, a lot of land animals rely on them in the Arctic. It contributes to stronger droughts, fires, hurricanes when you have these rising sea levels. due to this melting of the glaciers. And so, of course, that's going to result in more loss of life. But the last thing I want to talk about, and I'm kind of speeding through here, are conservation efforts. A positive note, right? There are efforts made by lots of organizations to prevent this and reverse it and preserve our biodiversity, right? And I know it's a study question, so I'll just kind of talk it to you. And then I want to show you this video, the last 2 minutes. It's pretty neat. I don't have to show the video. It's like 5 minutes, but let me see here. Let me see. Maybe I'll just not show the video. Whoop, come on. And maybe you guys can watch it like if you're interested, because I have the link on the slides. But it's for in Yellowstone. Man. My computer can't handle this. Come on. It's like 11 minutes. Wow. It's a cool video, and it's not even loading. I'll just finish. And it's included in the slides, but yeah, it's a 4-minute video, so that's okay. No problem. But efforts include national parks. The San Diego Zoo does a lot of conservation. They have a center where they breed endangered animals to help repopulate them, and so they're not endangered anymore. They also have this thing called the frozen zoo, where they actually have cells of endangered species frozen so that if need be, they can be used in artificial fertilization and to repopulate animals. And then the last conservation effort I wanted to mention is sustainable fuels, namely solar energy, wind energy, things like that, that are becoming more prevalent. That's it, guys. I'm gonna end it there. That's the semester. It's a wrap. We made it. You're welcome. We won't tell if you went over time. Yeah, usually, I don't know. I don't know. This semester, I don't know if it has to do with Zoom or what, the online, I spend more time on things. So I've been cutting it close more. Whatever. Oh, thank you guys. So yeah, it's it. It's a wrap. It's over. And you guys pat yourselves on the back. Man, I couldn't imagine being on an online class with online labs. I couldn't. It's just amazing to me that you guys made it, and not just made it, but learned and strived, and it's amazing. So thank you all. Please come visit when COVID dies. Reach out with questions or just to say hi. And yeah, that's it. Thanks again, everyone. And congrats. Hopefully, yeah, one day I'll get to micro. I would love to. I think it'd be awesome. Gotta convince Saddleback. But yeah, all right, guys, that's it. So good luck. Exam info, I'll be in touch with the email next week on the makeup. And is there any other updates? No, I don't think so. So yeah, good luck on your final exams, and have a great rest of your week. Am I doing office hours on Monday? Yeah, sure. Just email me. I'm here. So shoot me an email. We'll set it up. All right, guys. Have a great night.